Welcome back, Storytellers, to the Storyteller Show podcast. I'm Jackie here with Theresa again, and this month we are diving into magical worlds. So we are exploring all the fantasy, sci-fi, and irresistible worlds of adventure. We are here with a special episode called The World of Writing Craft, Universe Building Edition. And we have a super special guest with us today, Dr. Rebecca Rowe, who is going to introduce herself. Dr. Rowe, thank you so much for joining us today. To kick things off, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me today. So, I am Dr. Rebecca Rowe. I am Assistant Professor of Children's Literature at East Texas A&M University, which mostly means that I get to talk about like picture books and graphic novels all day, and it really is the best thing. I am also the editor of the International Journal of Disney Studies, so I spend a lot of time talking about Disney as well. So, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So you are Assistant Professor of Children's Literature, but we'd really love to hear a little more about your personal journey. So could you tell us what inspired you to study and then teach Kidlit?
So, when I started my undergrad is actually known for children's literature research. I did not know that. And I was like, you can take children's literature? I love children's literature, which really should read. I love Disney. Like, I didn't know what I was getting into at the time. And I signed up for the class, absolutely fell in love with the study of children's literature and just the fact that from these seemingly simple texts, you can pull out so much, and there's, such beauty to the craft of it all. Um, and I was kind of hooked from there. I went and got my master's and my Ph.D. in children's literature, and now I'm here teaching.
That's beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Disney has influenced your passion for storytelling and world building?
Well, I don't remember a time before Disney. I'm sure many people can, tell a similar story. My parents love Disney. Apparently, I watched Beauty and the Beast so many times they had to buy a new VCR tape because it just wore out. And we'd go to Disney World, and it was just a huge part of my childhood. And like I said, it was the reason I wanted to go into studying children's literatures because I love Disney so much. As a kid, I really loved that, in a Disney movie, you always have a happy ending. It's always going to be fine. As an adult, I always say that Disney movies, Pixar movies especially, kind of run the gamut of human emotion in an hour and a half. It's very cathartic. You just feel everything and you're good, which I love. That's really beautiful storytelling. As far as story world building goes, I think of the parks, right? The first time I went to the parks, I was like 2 years old, which I don't suggest. But my dad was there on business and my mom and I went. I don't remember that trip, but I grew up going to Disney World, and just to be able to step into stories that I had seen on a screen, it's so magical. It's still magical. I continue to go to Disney World and Universal and continue to love them. They can actually create a world that feels so real that they can then make it real. I think that's a hallmark of wonderful world building.
I just am buzzing when I hear you say that you wore out the VHS tape. That's so funny because you have a good story if kids keep coming back to it. Whether it's a movie, they want to rewatch it over and over again, or a story that they want to reread constantly. I think that's when you know you have a winner. But let me take us back for a quick moment because you have your master's, you have your PhD, so we know you do research and you've done research in the past. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you currently research, if you're doing anything now, and what you've done as you went through your educational journey?
For, I guess, most of my graduate work up through today, I have been working on research that really looks at how adaptations change identities. So thinking about, things like race bending and gender bending, obviously where characters drastically changed, but also looking at the smaller ways that we change characters through the adaptation process. I focus mostly on race, gender, ability, and body size and shape. I spend a lot of time looking at visuals and measuring things, and it's all great. The last few years, I've been working on a book that is called Adapting American Adulthood, which is not finished yet. Please don't go and try to buy it. Uh, but this is the book I've been working on, and it's about how adults get adapted from children's literature to family media. So, specifically looking at the way that adults try to make a bigger space for themselves in children's screen media than they have in children's literature. A lot of that, I would argue, is because adults they want to exist in these story worlds in ways that sometimes adults can't in children's literature for reasons that make a lot of sense. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I actually want it to stay like that for children's literature, but that's the like impetus for why I argue these adult characters change so much.
What are some of the best examples of stories that kind of create that world building, like classic versus modern? I think of the Brothers Grimm. I'm kind of obsessed with the Brothers Grimm. I guess it's part of that German root, but I love classic literature. And when you were talking about Beauty and the Beast, I did the same thing with The Little Mermaid. Every day after school, I was watching Little Mermaid. My siblings, they're like, again? What are you doing? Obviously, Little Mermaid is completely different, but it is in that same boat of classic literature, right? So I'm thinking Hobbit, Percy Jackson, and then of course Disney. What, in your thought process, what are of the best examples when you think of world building?
I think one of the best ways to tell that it's strong world building is that people can name the world sometimes before they can name the book or the movie. So thinking about Wonderland and Neverland and Oz and Middle Earth, obviously the Shire. Oh gosh, I wish I could live in the Shire. Um, Pan which I do not want to live in, from Hunger Games. But, Star Wars, the galaxy far, far away. We don't have a name for it, but like everyone wants to go there. And you now can at Disney. Anyway, just a walking advertisement for Disney. Um, the Hundred Acre Woods, Narnia, any of these places where it's become so famous that it can kind of exist outside of its source text, I think is a really good sign that it's, strong world building. And you were mentioning like fairy tales. The Grimm's fairy tales, I think one of the reasons that those feel so alive is because a lot of them are based in real places, right? Especially the Black Forest. And there's something about that, right? It's something about like, oh, you can actually go to the place where Little Red Riding Hood got eaten by a wolf. Like it is a real place in the world. I mean, not like the cabin or cottage or whatever, but like the forest is real. And there's something terrifying about that element. And that's the good kind of fear that you have in those old fairy tales.
I have to ask, are you sponsored by Disney?
I'm not sponsored by Disney. I mean, at this point, they should be paying me, but no, they're sadly not.
That was my next point was while we're here and we're live, Disney, you are missing out over here. This is your girl. Okay? Oh, no, but you guys are right. I just had all these splashes of all the worlds that come from books and then movies. That, like you said, they exist on their own as an independent entity at the end of the day. We'll come back to that. But we talked about what makes a universe strong. What do you think actually makes them stand out? So are there certain elements that make them really memorable?
So this is especially true in late 20th century and 21st century fantasy. For fantasy, the last few decades, there's been a real merging of genres. There are very few fantasy novels, especially for kids, that you can pick up today. That's not a dozen other genres. I do blame this on J.K. Rowling because she has said in several interviews that she doesn't like fantasy. She doesn't read fantasy. Harry Potter actually has more hallmarks of the school story genre than it does of the fantasy genre. So I bring all of that up to say that the realism of these fantasy stories is often what makes them feel so real. I know that like seems really, really basic. But it's the small details that make a place actually seem livable. So for example, the Shire is a very quaint and picturesque version of rural living, right? but it's not that far off, right? It's not that far off from how you can actually live. And they do have hobbit holes in New Zealand now that you can go and like rent and stuff. And so it's that kind of like, yeah, I can imagine this place. This is a place that is close enough to my reality that I can imagine myself there. I think that is one of the most important things for any kind of fantasy. For sci-fi, it works a little bit differently. There's a lot more explanation that goes into sci-fi and imagining the spaces.
That kind of brings up something that you were speaking about when you were talking about the television versus the book version. You were mentioning the adult versus the kid. That reminds me of that quote from C.S. Lewis, where he says that when adults go back into reading children's books, they get more out of them. And with that being said, how do you think these stories can resonate across generations?
So one of the things that I think is really important when we look at adult literature in particular, this is different for film, slightly different trends, but adult literature, postmodern literature is very focused on the day-to-day minutia, that can be very boring. Um, it's just like yesterday was the same as today, which will be the same as tomorrow, and my life has no meaning. That is postmodern literature. And like, I understand there's more plot than that, but it is essentially what's happening. And so then adults go back and they read children's literature, which are character-driven and plot-driven. And um, one of the things that a lot of adult literature has is a focus on the monotony of life, the fact that nothing ever changes, versus children's and young adult literature is all about change. And we change throughout our lifetime. Sandra Beckett in her book, Crossover Fiction, talks about how this element of transformation is what brings adults back to children's and YA over and over again. You're getting a new job, you're getting married, you're moving houses, whatever. A transformation is happening in your life. And you suddenly are connecting more to these child and teen characters than the monotony that comes in a lot of adult literature. Um, so that is one of the reasons I would say that, these things appeal across generations, especially good story worlds, because then adults can walk around themselves and like actually get to experience it and they don't have to live just through the child characters. I do think this is a reason why Wicked is really popular right now, but that's like neither here nor there.
Let me take us to a different perspective. I want us to talk a little bit about writers. So imagine that you have someone who perhaps is a first time aspiring author in front of you. They know they want to write fantasy. They're really excited about it. Where do they even begin when it comes to world building? Are there any foundational elements like rules or just focusing on the setting or focusing on character backstories? What would you recommend that they start with outlining right from the beginning?
So part of what I'm going to say is from actual academic training, and part of it is going to be from my own experience creative writing. And I say this with a caveat that I am not published. This is just for funsies. Start where your brain goes. Every brain works a little differently. I'm good at creating characters. Characters make sense to me. So I generally start off with my characters and I figure out what's going on around them and what their setting is. But some people, they'll be able to create a world and they're like, oh, snap, something has to happen in the world. Right. And then some people have this like fully fleshed out plot and need people in a world to like make it work, right? And so really just follow where your brain goes. From there, I like to ask questions. Um, this is very silly and I understand this, but I have heard other authors talk about this. I like to ask my characters questions and then think about how they would respond, not just in content, but like how would they talk to me if I asked them these questions. The Man Who Invented Christmas, which stars Dan Stevens, is about Charles Dickens writing The Christmas Carol, and he does the same thing, right? And we actually do have stuff from his like diaries and letters that talks about that was part of his process. Other, famous authors have talked about it as well. So just asking questions of like, why would you do that? And what is your favorite food? Like whatever, right? Just to flesh those things out. But you can do the same thing when you're doing story world building. And so thinking about how do bathrooms work? Which somebody should have asked J.K. Rowling earlier than they did. Right. Um, It's like, how do bathrooms work? How do people, what kind of transportation do people use to get from one place to the other? What's the, do they have climate change wherever this is? Like, these kinds of questions can really help you start thinking through it. And this, again, kind of silly, but also if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, they have so many tools to help with story creation, especially with characters, right? Fill out a character sheet for all of your characters. You will know so much about them by the time you're done. And then you have like a visual representation while you're writing, and you're like, man, what color was his eyes? You wrote it down. So it's those kinds of things. Asking yourself questions. Um, Following where your brain goes. You don't have to write everything in order. You just got to write in the way that makes sense to you.
So that sounds like that's related to how consistent are you writing? Is there logic and reason? Is there a rule setting? Do you limit your characters? Any of that goes into immersing the story for the reader. Is there a rule or is there a limitation for you as the writer in creating those worlds?
Yeah, so I think this is especially important to think about in fantasy. I will admit, one of my pet peeves in fantasy is when there are magic rules that are clearly established and then they break them. So, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the example of this, uses time turners in ways that JK's books clearly say is not possible. And one of the reasons why I don't consider it canon, personally, that is a personal opinion. So, like, that bugs me deeply. I am very consistent. I have so many Excel sheets. That's how I keep track of everything. I am very meticulous and organized that way. However, two things against that level of detail. One is that a few years ago, I saw a tweet that I can't stop thinking about ever since, where the person said, fantasy is about magic. Magic doesn't make sense. If you want rigid rules to follow, go write sci-fi, because technology has to follow certain rules. And they were saying that magic is magical. It can do whatever it wants. And maybe that's true. I don't know. I'm still working through that. The thing I find more convincing, there are some great scholars and authors who are people of color who are coming from outside the United States context, who talk about how the need to have really rigid rules for magic is a very Western Anglo-American pattern of thinking about magic. Um, and that other places in Africa and Asia, um, they don't think about magic that way. They just don't. They don't need, rigid rules. So I think part of thinking through your consistency is knowing your genre, knowing your cultural context, knowing your audience. Um, how many rules are needed? How much do people actually care about? You would be surprised what they're going to care about. There have been several authors who've been asked questions where they were just like, why? Which is fantastic. So, yeah, know your genre, know your culture, know your audience.
I'm very intrigued by what you said about magic having rules and being very structured. That's very Western in its essence, because my cultural background is Puerto Rican and we have a lot of magic eaten ingrained in the culture. And it definitely does not have the same rules, or you'll see if you study history over time that the rules of magic change when people come to conquer the island. There's a very clear landmark in how ideas evolve. I'm just wondering if you have any examples for our listeners of different types of magic and fantasy that have been successful or perhaps are on their way to being successful. And by that, I mean you're selling in the US now.
My big suggestion would be Nadia Korafor. She is a Nigerian American author, and she writes science fiction and fantasy for young adults and for adults. One of her series has currently being made by, I think, HBO into a TV series. Very like she's very big. It has been really big in YA scholar circles for a while. But the way that she thinks through magic is really interesting because she is drawing a lot more on her Nigerian roots than she is on her American roots to think through magic. So she has some really cool things going on. Always give a shout out to her. Her work's great. And she's also really fun to follow on social media, but that's beside the point.
Never besides the point. No, we will try to put that up too so that people will be directed to her work.
This is good because I am a middle grade writer and I have magic and wizards and I kind of don't follow those traditional routes. Like Jackie's read my second manuscript for the next book, right? And I don't follow the traditional route. I'm like, okay, it's a book, right? Like so I'm the author. I can do whatever I want with the book, right? So that's how I feel about it. But and I'm a rebel, so to speak, and I don't stick with the traditional Western idea of how magic should work in a story. So my next question was in same relation to that, right? For writers and crafting stories for children in middle grade, how can you create that rich story?
So this was actually one of the generic differences between fantasy and sci-fi that developed during the 20th century. Sci-fi tends to give a lot more explanation of setting, of technology, of everything than fantasy does. Um, but I think that there are lots of ways to describe the world and describe your setting while keeping the action moving. So one of my favorite examples of this is C.S. Lewis is a man of few words. Like if you compare him to Tolkien, just very different word counts and a way of approaching things. Yes, yes. So in The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, when Lucy first goes into Narnia, she meets Mr. Tumnus, who takes her home. He has a very lovely, like warm, inviting home, and not a lot of description is given on the home. It, like when they first enter, you get it throughout the scene as they interact with things around the room. So I do think that's one of the ways to make it more accessible is just give the information when it's needed, instead of um, laying it all up front, because then people might forget and they need it when they need it and not way before.
I want to take us again back to someone who is newly writing. They're beginning their book. They have a really strong idea, but they know they want to write a book that's like another book. So they're very interested in magic. They want to write a book like Harry Potter. I have seen personally some authors have struggles when they start aspiring to one particular ideal. Could be their favorite or it could just be something that's very hot and trendy right now. So I would love some advice from a professor's point of view. How do you not fall into traps of trying to keep up with or accidentally copy someone else's work? How do you keep your voice strong and where do you start when you're just beginning writing fantasy?
I mean, I have to admit, when I first started writing, I was a teenager. Everything sounded like Harry Potter. Everything. There was Harry Potter everywhere. I go back and I read my earliest stuff, and I'm just like, ooh, too much Harry Potter, friend. It is a problem. It's really hard when there is a book or a series that kind of redefines the genre. We see the same thing with Hunger Games and the way that it changed YA dystopia. I think after that, for a while, had a brunette, yeah, girl or woman who was amazing and strong and all of these things, but was very much Katniss. Um, so one of my suggestions is to look at people who've done it successfully. Two great examples of this. Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instruments series started out as Harry Potter fan fiction. Started out as Ron Ginny slash fic, which is a choice. And it became this like really popular series. She has spin-offs from that series. And I didn't know that it was based on Harry Potter. It's so far removed, right? She has successfully um been able to move it far away. The other one that I think about a lot, okay, so this is on the more adult side. But 50 Shades of Grey started out as fan fiction of Twilight. So again, you can see how people are able to move it in a very different direction. But my suggestion is just to start one small detail at a time. So you've built this world and you're like, snap, this is Hogwarts. What am I going to do? Start with something small that you can change, right? They don't have four houses. And just take those small details and move it. If you move enough things in enough different directions, then it stops feeling like that original thing. So yeah, see how other people have successfully been able to monetize off of it, and then just take small steps.
I have to interject and just say that I was an intern for Penguin Random House not long ago. Or I guess it is long ago now. This summer 2023. Feels like it wasn't that long ago. But we had a whole discussion about fan fiction one day, just all the interns together with some of the staff. And, we're a very open community. I love fan fiction. I've read it since I was a kid. It helped me learn to read because I was a bad reader. But we had a few people who had really wonderful ideas and they wanted to create their original books from them, but they just couldn't release all the details that made it fan fiction. And we had a huge talk, lots of discussion, and no answers because no one knew what to do. And I love that you said one detail at a time. That works probably for more than one thing in life, that advice. But just start. Start, first of all. And then second, go and pace yourself instead of trying to do it all at once. I think a lot of people were getting overwhelmed.
And the other thing I would say to that is that a lot of publishers, studios, etc., are really interested in franchising right now. So we're starting to see people paying other people to write within their universe. So hold on to that story. Maybe it'll be useful one these days.
Put in your pocket. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if it's the same kind of thing, but you know how you have the Brothers Grimm, right? And then sometimes other authors kind of get inspired or they might use the same character. I keep thinking of Weasel Shirtlip, which is my daughter's favorite author because she has red, but red like wears like running shoes. And she's got like a gym outfit on, right? So, and then you have like Jack and the Beanstalk, right? It's supposed to be where the giant take the small little humans from their world and they work for the giant world because the king is obsessed with gold. So they take different elements from different authors and traditional storytelling. Can you do that? And because you were talking about how, oh, don't like make it similar to, say, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. How does that?
So what you're talking about, in scholarship, we call it retelling. I mean, I know that term is used outside of scholarship, but like there's 5,000 different terms for adaptation in my field. So retelling is the very specific kind that you're talking about. The great thing about things like Grimm's fairy tales, Rowe, Hans Christian Andersen, Oscar Wilde, all of them, they are in the free domain now. So you can do whatever you want to with them. Other thing like Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, Winnie the Pooh, all of these things are in the public domain. So you can do whatever you want with them. You can write in their story worlds, you can write their characters. There's literally nothing stopping you. So there's a lot more freedom with some of those things. And people have been doing occasionally disturbing things with that. There's a horror movie that came out a couple of years ago called Blood and Honey, which is like Pooh and the gang are murdering people. I haven't gotten all the way through the trailer yet. It looks terrifying. Much less watch the movie. It was released the year that Winnie the Pooh went on the public domain, so you really can get away with pretty much anything.
For people who are not watching, my face is horrified when she said Winnie the Pooh horror movie. I don't need to see it. I'm already scared. I know. For people who are very new, who kind of don't understand what public domain is, can you give us a little definition and also some advice on where to find those stories that are now in public domain?
Yes, I can answer that. Most literature, films, etc., are non-copyrighted, and the company that has been controlling copyright for a hot second has been Disney, because of course it is. They were trying to protect Steamboat Willie, so they kept lobbying Congress in the U.S. This is just the U.S. Other countries have different laws, but they've been lobbying Congress for a really long time to keep pushing out the copyright date or how long something can be in copyright. And they finally lost that battle. The Steamboat Willie is also in public domain in case you need some Mickey Mouse. But it does have to be specifically the Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse. They have like lots of rules on this. But so eventually a copyright runs out, and that means that it's free in the public domain. A public domain essentially means that the person who created it and their loved ones can't make money off of it anymore, so it's free to anyone. So I forget exactly how many years it is now, but it's something like 70 years after the author dies, it is still in copyright. And then after that date, it goes into public domain and it's free for everyone. This is not a helpful answer, but if I ever need to figure out if something is in public domain, I legitimately Google it, put in the title and the words public domain. I'm sure if you put in like children's literature in the public domain, it would give you a whole list, but I've never tried to find like an archive.
That's great. When you think of children's literature, how can a writer assess whether their world building is effective? Are there key questions they should ask themselves? Or are there beta readers?
So I'm coming at this kind of from a fan fiction angle, but I do find it useful. So ask yourself, just looking at the words on the page, because you can't include all of the stuff in your head. There's always going to be more about the world in your head than there is on the page. Just looking at the stuff on the page, if you were to read this and then you're suddenly magically transported into the world of your book, what would you do in this world? Right? So like, could you exist in this world? How would you engage? Not with the plot, not with the characters. We don't care about them right now. Would you go be a teacher? How are you going to survive in Pan Am? Would you be an animal in the 100-Acre Wood, right? Like, just how would you actually physically exist in this space? It's easier to ask this of beta readers. So give it to a beta reader and ask them, if you were in this world, what would you do? And if they can imagine it, then you're probably good. But another thing to ask is if you were going to write a fan fiction based on this story, or not based on the story, but based on the world, what kind of story would you write? And if they can come up with an idea of like a fully fleshed out story in your world, then your world is fleshed out.
That was awesome advice. I have not heard most of the things that you are advising people now. So I'm wishing that I had the money to enroll in your classes right now.
That's so sweet. Oh my goodness.
So we are closing out right now. We've asked you all the hard questions. Let's go over something fun. Do you have one top favorite Disney story as an adult?
I have my top 5.
Okay, well, let's step top 5. We know we can't choose one either. How could I even ask that question?
Yeah. So my top 5 are Lilo and Stitch, which I was obsessed with as a kid and continue to be. Brave, which I love everything about that movie. Princess and the Frog. I went to school really far from home and it reminded me of home, so I just really fell in love with that movie. Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I have always loved for the kind of the social justice message of it. In 1996, telling kids the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame was like pretty brave on Disney's part, and they did a decent job. And then Up from Pixar.
Like, those are amazing. Every time I watch Up, I start crying, and because my husband and I have been married for almost 20 years, and I always imagine like what we're going to be like as old people. And I know for a fact that my husband would totally like put in the house with balloons and have it go somewhere else. Like, I can totally imagine him doing that.
If you can get the first 12 minutes without crying, I'm not sure if your emotions are like okay.
Exactly. But I love those. Here's my add-on as far as traditional storytelling characters. Is there a particular book that you're obsessed with?
I have a very unfortunate affinity for Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. Like, some kids were like, I realized I was growing up when I didn't get my Hogwarts letter. I realized I was growing up when I realized I was too old for Peter Pan to come to my window. That like that's where I was. Um, anyway, there's so many problems with that book, but I love it. Alice in Wonderland is lovely. Winnie the Pooh is a perfect summertime read. Charles Perrault is my favorite fairy tale author, mainly because he has morals at the end of each of his fairy tales that are extremely sarcastic and they're just so funny and delightful. But I will say, like, on the note of story building, I think my favorite author when it comes to story building is Tamora Pierce, and her Tortal universe. Um, Absolutely gorgeous story world building over many, many series. And that's one of those that feels real to me. And it's one that I feel like not enough people are talking about. If I had to pick a favorite story world ever, it's definitely Tortal.
You've been so wonderful. Thank you so much for talking with us and for all of your thoughts, all of your inspiration, all of your passion. I know everyone listening, whether they were a writer or maybe an educator or a parent, there was something here for everyone. So we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
I'm so thankful that we had this conversation today. But before we wrap up, where can our listeners follow your work? And is there anything exciting that you're working on that you'd like to share?
In case you ever want to read scholarship, you can go on Google Scholar and look up my name. I have an account so you can see everything that I've written, which is kind of fun. Um, or sorry, everything I've published. You cannot see everything I've written. No. Um, but the big thing for me right now is the International Journal of Disney Studies. I founded it with Robin Muir. We just had our first issue come out. The first issue is completely free. So if you want to see what it looks like to study Disney, check it out. It's really fun.
All right. Thank you, storytellers, for tuning in. We hope you had a wonderful time. If you did not catch everything that we said at the end there, we want you to go to our website, thestorytellershelfpodcast.com, go to our episodic calendar menu, and you will see Dr. Rebecca Rowe's name on there. You can click on it and learn where to find her on the internet. And maybe you'll be in her class one day. I don't know. Reach out to us if you end up enrolling. We would love to connect and say, yeah, the podcast helped somebody get to where they wanted to be. But otherwise, please, if you can, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share this with someone who you think needs it, and we will see you next time.
Hi, everyone.